It is Sunday, May 17th, and it's getting pretty late with Jake Landau. Today we have a new guest for you. He is the president of the Oxford Provincial Liberal Association, vice chair of the Oxford Federal Liberal Association, and the LGBTQ plus engagement coordinator for the Ontario Liberal Party. And he's here to talk to us about various comings and goings in the Ontario Liberal Party at the current moment. His name is Jordan Kent. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Jake. Really appreciate it.
Well, no, I mean, there's been a lot of hullabaloo about the Ontario Liberal Party recently. Things were starting to go up in the polls, and then there was a bit of a thing in Scarborough Southwest, which I was there in person to witness, and you can read my coverage of that on my Substack. But what I want to talk to you about, Jordan, is in general, how are things going in the Ontario Liberal Party at the moment?
To be honest with you, I feel like we're a party in crisis at the moment. We're doing well in the polls, yes, but that's a lot of borrowed, manufactured goodwill from the federal Liberal Party. That because, and I think it's important to take it back to context. A year and a bit ago, we were on the press of extinction as a political party across the country. We have now seen a rebounding, and I know you're not particularly a Prime Minister Carney fan. I am. I think that we've seen a rebound, and as long as the government continues to do the right things, we will have goodwill. On the provincial side, it's a culmination of a few things. It's the attitude and the recklessness of the Ford government finally catching up to them, as well as being a moment for our party where we were hitting our stride, as you were saying, heading into Scarborough Southwest. It seemed like we had a very robust leadership race. We had a lot of things going for us. And unfortunately, I want to reserve some judgment on what happened in Scarborough until after the arbitration committee has done its work. But honestly, we have a culture problem, we have a trust problem, we have a communications problem, and it's up to all of us as Ontario Liberals to ensure that this momentum that we were seeing in the polls actually translates into an election win in the next election, and to also make sure that we're not running on a we're not Doug Ford platform, but actually offering something to Ontarians.
Are there a lot of Ontario Liberals, though, who you think are content to run on the We're Not Doug Ford platform, to kind of just wait for him to stumble into enough unpopularity that they can slide in without having to do any fundamental reflection on why the Ontario Liberals haven't been very popular?
Well, I think you can look back at as far, and I've written about this on my own Substack, The Political North. I've talked a little bit about the fact that our party was taught a lesson in 2018, taught it again in 2022, given the same message again, albeit with a little bit of a better result, getting party status and all that in 2025. But the problem is, until we start fixing some of these cultural issues, we won't win. And, part of my political journey has been trying to ensure that we are, sounding the alarm about the disconnect between what people in, the GTA or Ottawa think is important as to how it pertains to something in a rural community like mine. And we certainly have a lot of, challenges in rural Ontario that also appear in the cities, just they're felt a lot more directly here in a rural community like mine.
And if you could give some context to people listening at home, where exactly in the province is your riding, Oxford?
So yeah, so Oxford is located in the southwest. It's located roughly in the middle of Kitchener, Waterloo, and London, right at the cutoff for the 403 down at my part of the province. As a fun note, when we were in the last provincial election, I was working for my very good friend Bernie Martin, who is our Liberal candidate here, and we did not have a single visit from the leader or anybody in the party infrastructure other than Catherine McGarry coming out to our campaign
The
kickoff.
party president,
The
for
party president.
those without contact. And I mean, when you talk about the southwest of Ontario, one thing, like, I have family there. I've got family who live in Windsor. And one thing that always comes to mind when I think about that region of Ontario is a lot of the time, liberals, both federally and provincially, come in third. just because it's a very labor heavy part of the province, and the liberal bona fides with labor are, to be honest, pretty dog shit.
Yeah, well, and I would argue that, we lost our way back. I remember during the McGuinty and the Wynne era, and when I was a conservative, right? And we used to always say to ourselves, why do the unions back the liberals? We couldn't figure it out. And being on the other side of the equation now is even more puzzling, where, a lot of we've lost working class communities. We have lost a lot of our touch with these people, and we've mistaken,
They're
in my
blue
opinion.
orange swing areas now because the
Yes.
liberal, like the both the conservatives and the NDP will talk to workers' concerns. They have completely different solutions, but they're talking to it in a way that liberals, they don't even bother.
Correct. And I think we've lost some of that over the last couple of years, is this honest self-reflection and saying, you know what, our policies aren't resonating in rural Ontario or in these blue orange ridings. We're not offering, and this has been my big criticism so far of the leadership race, is that I don't think a lot of the candidates have figured out their why. What are you like? They know why they're running for leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. They're not able to give me the value proposition in why do I should I vote for you? Whether it's caucus members like Rob Serjanik and Lee Fairclough, or if it's some of the outsiders, Eric Lombardi, Vikram Honda, Dylan Mirando, uh, Navdeep Bains, and Nate Erskine Smith from the federal side. I have yet to hear a concrete argument from anybody as to why they would resonate in rural Ontario or what they're going to do to help people in these types of blue orange ridings. And I think, certainly by rebuilding trust and offering policies that are rooted in people's daily realities, we will actually see um, more results in some of these ridings. And federally, we saw it last year, right? Where a lot of these blue orange riding battlegrounds in the Southwest became red blue. And, regardless of where people are, I think it's an honest conversation that we need to have. And heading into next year's AGM and policy convention, we certainly need our PLA friends from across the province putting in ideas through the policy resolution process so that we can hopefully come up with a platform that's reflective of the needs of all Ontarians, from Timmins to Sarnia to Windsor, all the way up to Ottawa and across the province in between.
But one of the problems, like a very practical and specific one, that's caused liberals to suffer, in the opinion of labor voters, is that frequently, both federally and provincially, liberals in their time have used back to work legislation to strip unionized workers, both public and private sector, of their charter guaranteed right to collectively bargain and to strike. And yeah, it's easy to talk about how this time will be different. This time they'll make new overtures. But like it's real I can fully understand why it's really hard for these voters to trust that anything will be different. And credit to Doug Ford here, like he's terrible to public sector unions, but like for private sector, like the construction unions, he makes sure they have tons of work for their members. Like he's very practically taking care of that concern of theirs. And it's just I don't know how easy of a time any liberal, federal or provincial, is going to have convincing people they're going to do something different, especially when the federal liberals, the Carney liberals, are doing it still, like very recently.
Well, and that I think speaks to the need for the Ontario Liberal Party to carve out its own identity through this process and to decide between now and the policy convention next year, what do we stand for as a party? Not riding off Prime Minister Carney's coattails, not trying to coast on goodwill and good vibes, but actually figure out, are we the party of organized labor? Are we the party of rural and small town Ontario? Are we the party of marginalized communities? And if we are wanting to become that voice for people across this province, then we need policy solutions that resonate. And, I could talk to union jobs specifically. In my riding of Oxford, we lost about 1,500 jobs at the Cami plant when Cami Ingersoll GM's plant closed a few months ago. And, there's a lot of talk about whether it's due to the electric car market, or whether it is due to the challenges with tariffs and all that kind of stuff. But I would certainly argue that in moments like this, it's incumbent upon liberals at both levels to be offering something in return instead of just saying, sorry, your jobs are gone. It's what are we going to do to bring those jobs back, whether it's to the
Especially if
defense.
you're talking about distinguishing the Ontario Liberals from the federal Liberals, when both the federal Liberals and Doug Ford's provincial Conservatives worked together to give these blanket subsidies, it appears, without much conditions or protections for jobs to these auto workers, then you do kind of need to distinguish yourself.
Absolutely. And I've often been saying, people look at ridings like mine and say that, rural ridings are conservative. They're not conservative, they're ignored by the party in our policies, in our strategy sessions, in the voices being represented on staff, and in the offices where these types of decisions are being made. It's very hard for people who aren't in these circles and running and living in these places to understand exactly what the challenges are. And obviously I can recognize that we're people are struggling across our province, but we need to offer a vision of hope. And that's personally why I was quite excited to lead the charge at provincial council back in March, to be able to have a resolutions-based policy convention scheduled for next May.
And for context to people, and we'll go into a bit about the Ontario Liberal Party's organizational structure. Previously on this show, we've talked to a friend of yours, Noah Parker, who is on the executive council, but you, as a riding president, are on the provincial council instead. Could you explain the difference between these two things and which is responsible for what?
So how it's from my understanding, and I could be wrong. Well, if someone wants to correct in the comment section later, happy to discuss and debate it further. Executive council is elected directly by members to be able to manage some of the affairs of the party, and they're supposed to be a responsible governing body that makes decisions in the best fiduciary duty interests of the members of the Ontario Liberal Party. And we elect a bunch of RVPs, we have elect a bunch of vice president roles, from executive vice president down to VP org, VP comms, vice president policy. You can go on down the
And
list,
these are
as well as
elected at the party's central AGM, either as fully at large or as like region-wide positions.
correct. Whereas provincial council is made up of the executive council, the riding association presidents, members of the commissions, and as well as other people on. I think the executive director and the legal counsel for the party sit as non-voting
But the
members.
main distinction is that every riding association has in the province, for all 124 ridings, they each have a riding president. Hopefully, sometimes they're unfilled, and all of them get to participate in this wider conclave, if you will.
Yeah, and so provincial council is supposed to be the ultimate governing body of the party between elections, and a lot of the time in the past, it's been used as a rubber stamp. It's been used to bring ideas that were passed by executive council for ratification between elections. So I'll give an example. At the last provincial council meeting, there was a motion on the floor to change the way that we elect the executive council. Meaning, if you were wanting to run for a higher office, you'd need so many PLA presidents, commission representatives, or executive council members to sign your nomination forms to be able to allow you to seek president. I think it was 2 for the regional vice presidents, 5 for a portfolio, and I think it was 10. Don't quote me on that, for president.
Which
Large
would
majority.
largely, if I'm correct, have the effect of making it harder to challenge an incumbent, because
Correct.
incumbents would be able to cross endorse and protect each other pretty much.
Well, and I think it comes down also to this idea that, if you're considered to be scandalous or considered to be on the margins or the fringe, or you're controversial,
Which
that
liberals have an extremely low bar for.
yes. And, I think honestly, the cannibalization of liberals inside of our own tent is something that needs to stop. We have more than enough issues within our own party to be focusing on without going after each other in the process. Like I read with quite a lot of interest, a lot of the Twitter threads we're seeing these days in the aftermath of Scarborough, and just seeing how people have this baked in idea one way or the other, right? As to whether or not they fall with the establishment, and they believe that the process was good and fair and all of that, or they fall on the other side of the spectrum where they're really, really angry. And I have a lot of friends who are not supporting Nate Erskine Smith, but feel very strongly about the results in Scarborough Southwest.
Yeah,
And from the
I
beginning,
mean,
I was
like, even without knowing a lot of the specifics here and without having a full investigation conducted, like, it's clear to me from some of the things that aren't being contested by the opponents of Nate's account of things, like, that there are some things that were clearly wrong. Like, a missing ballot balance sheet, which shows that the amount of blank ballots given to a returning officer equals the amount handed out plus the amount left over. Like, having one of those missing is crazy, especially combined with the allegation of, like, dozens more votes cast than there were voters struck off the list. Like, also, we have seen photos of people, like, taking calls and using their phones to take photos of their ballots. So that's not even an allegation as much as, like, proof that ballot secrecy was completely pierced, which is really not supposed to happen. But there are a lot of things that went wrong with this, and, like, yes, some of them are just allegation now. Some have more concrete proof for them, but, like, it's hard for me to completely, just sit back and, wait for party insiders to decide whether or not something went right or wrong, because aren't those the people accused of doing something right or wrong?
well, and I would actually say that the chair of the arbitration committee, David Zimmer, is a well-respected, highly regarded former cabinet minister. He is apolitical when it has come to internal elections over the past few years. He was a minister under Kathleen Wynne. I fully trust his judgment as arbitration chair, and I look forward to seeing his report in due time. I hope that if there is proven substantive uh, results that come out of this arbitration hearing on Wednesday, that people will be held accountable for it, and that there will be changes to the rules of procedure, to the Constitution, and other things to make this a lot more uh, friendly to people that want to be involved in the party. Because what I've heard from a lot of people is that they feel very disillusioned, very discouraged, very feeling they don't want to be a part of the party anymore. And I've had to have a lot of conversations with people over the last few days saying, look, don't give up on this party. We need you. We need to stand together. We need to push back on uh, some of this nonsense that's taking place in our
But that
party. And
that raises a question, though, doesn't it? You're right that the party needs people to not give up on it if it's going to survive. But at a certain point, do those people necessarily need the Ontario Liberal Party? Like, for progressives, it's hard not to say that the Ontario NDP isn't a viable option to park your vote in a lot of places. Especially, we just talked about places the Ontario Liberals come third. Like, and, not to inject my own bias into things too much, but I certainly would prefer the Ontario NDP over Doug Ford's Conservatives, and, like, I kind of think it's weird when liberals in this province treat both of those as equally bad. Like, I don't even think one of those would be bad.
Well, and I think that's been part of the problem is over the last few elections, especially since Doug Ford came on the scene, we've had this little, I call it like a mini primary in the first 2 weeks of a provincial campaign where, voters spend the first 2 weeks listening to the NDP and the Liberals, and they start hearing about our ideas. And we on the left spend more time cannibalizing each other and attacking each other than laying out a vision for the future of the province. And, frankly, I know why. I know and understand why a lot of people vote NDP. And I greatly respect my friends in the New Democratic Party at the federal and provincial level. But at this moment in time, I think we need a strong Liberal Party that can unite people in the center and can, not can articulate a vision that speaks to people's lives without hollowing out either the left or the center in our party, right? Like I see the need for a strong Liberal Party, and I'm seeing it in my own community where a lot of former Conservatives, former New Democrats are coming to me and they're saying, "Hey, you know what? I want to be a part of the Ontario Liberal Party. I want to make it to help you guys make change, but I'm concerned about the future." And this is where membership comes in, realizing that with an AGM in less than a year, we're going to have an opportunity to elect a new executive council and to hopefully right the ship, and also to use this opportunity to hold leadership candidates accountable right through this process and to ask them for their plans on party renewal and on cleaning up some of the mess that we're seeing, and in building a more member centric party. And I'm a little worried that by people choosing to just say no, I'm done, means that we're ceding ground to these people to continue to allow for this type of conduct to continue in our party.
Right, but at the same time, like if everyone leaves and they have nothing left but their own private club of 20 shitheads, then y- you know. But moving on to another thing, like back on a different topic on the Scarborough Southwest nomination, not necessarily to do with irregularities during voting at all, but just with the green lighting process for how candidates are approved. There one something that came out in a few days before the vote itself, but had apparently been a topic of conversation for several months. And I did read a piece about this in a national newspaper in Bangladesh. Asanul Hafiz, the guy who beat Nate for the nomination, allegedly, assuming there's no improprieties discovered. But anyway, to be a candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party, you have to be greenlit, which means the nominations commissioner has to decide that you're not a liability, that you don't have scandalous things in your past that could reflect poorly. In this case, there was no nominations commissioner; they weren't able to act, so it defaulted to Catherine McGarry, the party president. Which and my question is, like I said, in Bangladeshi, in a major national newspaper there, they talked about things that Asanul Hafiz, as an adult man, posted about a decade ago on Facebook. But he was roughly around my age that I am now, where he repeatedly posted calling for political violence against political opponents of his family in Bangladesh. Calling for them to be like in a hospital jail bed, calling for the execution of several people, one of whom was indeed executed under contentious circumstances by the Bangladesh government of the time. Amnesty International filed a complaint about that. There are protests. And like in the Bangladeshi paper, the new article that I read that came out on the 8th, like there were people in Bangladesh who they interviewed and who were aware of his family who were asking, how is this acceptable to Canadians? They have said that they oppose the death penalty in all forms, both in Canada and abroad. And I think that's an important part to bring up because there's been a lot of hay made over, foreign interference and the racial demographics of who participated in this nomination contest. But there's people in Bangladesh saying, hey, we do not want to be associated with the extreme speech of this guy. And I guess my question for you, Jordan, is like, how do you, as an Ontario Liberal member, and how do you think other Ontario Liberal members should react to this guy being allowed to run? Because, like that, I would have thought that was beyond the pale, and that's what the green lighting process is supposed to prevent.
It's a tough topic to talk about because obviously I've known Mr. Hafiz for a number of years. We go back to the 2023 federal by-election in Oxford County when he came to help us when we were running David Hilderley against Arpin Khanna in that by-election. I personally believe that there are a lot more questions than answers at this point, and it would be entirely uh, appropriate for us to ask Catherine McGarry, the party president, for an explanation as to why this was deemed to be okay. Given the era we're in of politics, where social media is often reviewed and people are taken to task for things, and given how many candidates we have federally and provincially over the years disqualified and removed from the ballot for less,
Much
uh,
less.
much less. I think
I think at one point didn't the Ontario Liberals remove a candidate in either the last cycle or the 2022 cycle for like comments he made in a Minecraft server as a teenager?
if I remember the candidate correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was homophobic comments made by someone who was in the closet at the time.
Yeah, and they were a
Truthfully.
teenage like that, which like it isn't great, but there that it's a bit different from calling for the death of someone who then gets executed.
Well, and to be fair, I believe people's views can change. I believe people can have a difference, can say one thing at 19 and believe something else at, 30 or 35. But I think rather than just sweeping it under the rug and saying, no, we're not supposed to talk about this, we're not supposed to have a conversation about
Because I
these
can
things.
guarantee conservatives in the NDP definitely will talk about it.
Well, and from my friends in the Conservative Party and New Democratic Party that I've talked to who work at central headquarters in Toronto and in Ottawa are laughing, going, "This is great for us. Like, thank you for this gift of all of these comments." And I mean, look at my MP here when he ran in 2019 in Brampton North, I believe it was. Uh, he had a bunch of my current MP, Arpan Khanna, had a bunch of homophobic comments that were made online that he was held accountable for. And he said, I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to do better. And the Conservative Party allowed him to not only stay on the ballot, but to run in a future by-election here in Oxford. So, like, I think the
But
best
surely
thing.
you would like higher standards for your party than that.
Oh, like, and this is maybe where I differ because having experience as a campaign manager and as a PLA president and some of those other things, whenever I approach somebody to run for federal or provincial office, I personally do a deep dive to
You
see
check.
what is it. I check.
You
You want to check
bother
their
to
social
and
media.
that's the funny thing, because when I wrote my piece on this, where I first wrote about that, and I asked questions about the green light process. I'm like, was the party aware of this? How could they not be aware of this? And then I had party insiders responding to say, of course they were aware, we just didn't think it was a problem. And I'm like, that's not good.
No. Well, and certainly like we were saying, people have been disqualified for less. I think that there is an obligation on the part of Catherine McGarry as nomination commissioner to explain publicly at some point sooner or later to restore some trust in the process why exactly this was overlooked or why it was okay. Does Mr. Hafiz disavow these views and statements he's made in the past, right? Does he condone what he posted? And
And for
I think
context,
it's
he
simple.
made these posts in 2013, but in 2012 was when he bought the first of his 30 Domino's pizza franchises. Like this was an adult man, and I would say, like, if you're going to take credit for the good things you did in 2012 and 2013, you kind of also got to answer for the bad things.
Yeah, well, certainly. And I'm sure if anybody looked into anybody's past, there's comments that were made or things that were said that you would probably regret from a
Oh, of
point of
course.
just being young.
I'm autistic. I'm sure there's like a whole plethora of things I said as a teenager that make me
Oh,
cringe.
100% that I'm in the same boat, but I think it's important for the party sooner or later to respond to some of the criticism and to whether it's Mr. Hafiz coming out with an apology and disavowing his past statements or whatnot. I'm not sure what the best course of action is for the party. I think also there's questions that Catherine McGarry and Simon Tunstall and John Fraser need to answer. And given the fact that this was so tightly managed by the executive director of the party president, and the interim leader of our party, I believe there's a lot of questions they need to answer.
And it goes right to the very top. Like the green light, the process of who would be allowed to run was like right at the top of the food chain in terms of the Ontario Liberal Party hierarchy. So like it's not something easily passed down to a scapegoat, is what you're saying.
Well, and I'm saying that had they appointed uh, a party lawyer or somebody within the party who has experience handling nominations to have said, what, we know, and we knew this heading into from the moment Dolly Begum announced her resignation from the legislature to seek the federal seat in Scarborough Southwest. We knew Scarborough Southwest was going to be messy. We knew there was going to be controversy coming out of it. We knew a lot of this, and yet we did nothing to safeguard the process
And
in
I
terms
think
of.
Noah Parker on executive council explicitly said, hey, we should make sure we've crossed all our T's and dotted all our I's, so that, we don't have any questions after this is done. And I do feel bad for Noah Cassandra Parker that no one listened to his prophecy.
Yeah, like I think a lot of times we as liberals get stuck in our echo chambers. You and I are both New Leaf. There are people that are not. When we're inside of our echo chambers and we fail to reach out beyond our tent and say, hey, like I make a personal point of calling people on all sides of our party to have conversations about the future and what is happening and what we can do about it. And I'm very solutions based, right? Like I think in terms of some of the controversy coming out of Scarborough Southwest, we have to wait for David Zimmer and his committee to do their work with the arbitration
And they'll
committee.
be meeting on Wednesday on the 20th at the Sheraton in Toronto. Most media will be preoccupied because perhaps not coincidentally, there is a major Queen's Park Press Gallery event that day. I, however, am not a member of the Queen's Park Press Gallery, so I'll be in the lobby of the Sheraton if anyone wants to have some fun conversations.
Well, and certainly, I was a little surprised that it was taking place at the Sheraton on Wednesday. I expected it might have been taken care of sooner because of the media's hype around it and because of all like
Well,
every
what if Doug Ford just calls the by-election right now? I
like
would.
and this is the thing that people need to watch for is that by-elections in Ontario have to be called on a Wednesday, and they have to be no short. They can be no shorter than 28 days for a writ period. So
If he actually calls it while they're doing the hearing, I will die of laughter.
well, but I mean, this is what comes of not putting some of this into the hands of neutral third-party people to be able to say here, at least for the vetting process, make sure that these people are squeaky clean, make sure that there's no controversy, make sure that if there is controversy that we have an answer
For
to it.
actually running the balloting process and the checking of ID, do you think there's any merit to Nate's Erskine Smith's request to just have Elections Ontario run voting for nominations because they can make sure no one's a member of more than one party at one time? They can make sure that you have real ID based on their objective standards and trained staff. They can make sure the balloting area is run appropriately. And that doesn't mean you have to stop letting permanent residents vote too.
No, like I I see the merit. I would like to see more arguments for and against it before I take a firm position on it, obviously, just because, I there's definitely value and benefit in us having these conversations about, is Elections Ontario the best choice to lead the nomination process moving forward? Is it better that we just set up a select nominations and green light committee made up of people on executive council and in the party who are fully committed to being neutral? That's maybe another option. But certainly, I think that, at the very least, our party needs to clean up its process and needs to get rid of some of the confusion surrounding the rules and needs to just be unambiguously clear as to, what the next steps are. And obviously, I've heard that there's quite a lot of movement on some of these changes. And I know a good friend of ours is launching, and I don't know if he'll I probably should have checked before soft launching this for him, but in one of our friends is pushing for a change, constitutional amendment to the rules at the next AGM that would change who can vote in nomination races and in
To be clear,
party.
it would currently temporary residents are allowed to vote. You can be a student, you can be a tourist. As long as you can prove residence, except in the alleged instances here where you didn't have to prove residence in order to vote. But
Yes.
so, and the proposed amendment would not make it citizens only. It would make it citizens and permanent residents, which, in my opinion, is fair. It's what the federal liberals have done. It's what I always assumed ordinarily resident meant in the party rules. So, I think that seems like a reasonable cleanup to me. Do you think you'll be supporting that amendment?
I will be supporting the Section 31 liberal movement on an ongoing basis. I think that while I understand the criticisms, especially from that I've heard from young liberals about, international students and, some people that might feel alienated from the process, I do think it's important that we take the Hogue report seriously and that we do more to protect and safeguard our party from foreign interference.
And with all due respect to international students, they're here for 4 years.
Yeah, for
or
sure.
maybe a graduate degree or something, but like they're here to study. They're not here to be like they can potentially maybe be able to convert into a permanent residency if they apply and do the right things. And I'm definitely willing to talk about making it easier to get PR in this country. I'm pro immigration, but
Oh, no.
like I think a lot of Canadians will probably agree that the people who pick which candidates are on elections ballots, if they're not citizens, should at least have a long-term commitment to Canada beyond the short-term goal of working on a contract or getting a degree.
Well, and I certainly think, in light of what we've seen in Scarborough Southwest, this is something I've believed in long before Scarborough Southwest went down. But certainly with some of the allegations around voter ID and some possibly shady uh, balloting, for lack of better words, for voter identification, I think it's important for us to, take a look at this and clean up the rules. And obviously, from what I'm hearing, it might be too late to do it ahead of this leadership election coming up in the fall. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't seriously take this under consideration to do something about it at the next AGM.
Alrighty. Well, before we go, are there any last parting thoughts you have for the Ontario Liberal Party, for your fellow members?
Oh, there's lots of things I could say, but I think one of the things I'm going to call for is some unity in our party. I understand we're going through a leadership process. I understand we're going through a lot of chaotic news cycles and things, but we all need to unite, and we need to not only unite but hold people accountable when they're doing things that are perhaps against the democratic process, or that perhaps we don't particularly like. And I'm here to talk if anybody wants to have any conversations. I'm open and willing to have conversations about the future of our party and what we can do together in the coming years to ensure that we build a party that is not only ready to defeat Doug Ford, but that is offering a positive vision and that has rebuilt trust, not just with Ontarians, but within our own tent as well.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, Jordan, for joining the program. It has been a pleasure to have you, and perhaps we'll have you back again soon, closer to the leadership. This has been Jordan Kent, everybody, the president of the Oxford Provincial Liberal Association and the LGBTQ plus engagement coordinator for the Ontario Liberal Party. And that'll do it for this week's episode. Thank you for listening, everybody. You can catch the next episode the same place you caught this one, wherever you get your podcasts. And we will see you next Sunday. Cheers. This is the end of the show. Bye.